ladies and gentlemen, today we are brought in part by Echohack, my friend, and someone who is not new to the channel. You've been here before talking about a previous Diablo launch that I suppose will remain unnamed for the purposes of this video, but we're once again here for the next Diablo launch, and we really got some, I think, some hopes for this one. So we're just going to have a fun, casual chat about how the game is, what you enjoyed, what not. So without further ado, Echo, how you been, man?
Man, I am actually pretty tired. I don't know if you can see the purple
bags. You've been grinding.
My eyes.
You've been grinding.
Yeah, non-stop. I want to say in the public betas we're allowed to talk about, it's about 200 plus hours of game time already.
Okay. Well, you got me beat then. I think I only did, of course, I guess the game time and how many characters won't correlate, but I did 6 to 25 and then it shut off when I was on my 7th one going to 25. And I only 2 of them were hardcore, to be fair. I didn't play that much hardcore. I capped out a little bit with that. But
well, hardcore is kind of a joke right now anyway, so I mean, we could talk about that if you want.
I think we should talk about all of it, honestly, because here's I'll go first in order to set the pace and kind of how I'm feeling about it is I feel like I'm fairly down bad for games, so I just want a new game to play. Off the top, off the top, I want a new game to play. Most people who have grinded a lot on one game in particular will feel that way. They'll be like, I'm ready for the next one, okay? So I am probably a little biased to be a little bit more optimistic, to be fair. I gave it a 7 out of 10. That was my review. I thought it was fairly fair. There seems to be some very obvious problems, but there also seems to be some very obvious things, such as voice acting. The combat felt good. The story itself, the cutscenes were all beautiful. There were some things that I can find to love about the game, and there were some things I'm sure we'll get into that, I didn't love about the game as much. But that's kind of where I'm at. I thought I was a lukewarm take. I didn't think it was game changing or anything, but I did think it was mostly enjoyable for most of the time I played it,
Yeah. I think, I'll just come out and say it, I think it's the best Diablo game in the franchise, bar none. It's a solid, like you said, I think most people approaching it, if you were to play the beta as the released product,
yes,
it would be a 7 out of 10.
Yes.
I think that's a really good take. My take is that the beta is not the released product, and the released product will be very different than the beta. And I'll tell you why I know this. It's because I was one of the few people who played the press preview.
Sure,
and the press preview was fundamentally the same content as the beta. Now, at the time that the press preview came out, we weren't allowed to talk about the story and a few other things.
Sure.
But we were allowed to talk about the gameplay, and we were able to garner a lot of information and gather a lot of information in terms of power and skills, and actually look at the core mechanics of the game and start to even build up our really hardcore guides over at Maxroll for launch a little bit. But all that said, when we take a look at all the numbers and the skills, the legendary aspects, and all of the things that changed just from press preview, right? That's December. That's early December to March, right? That's 4 months or so. The amount of changes is insane. It's actually
good
crazy.
To know, because that's information I wouldn't know, because I didn't play the press release. I wasn't one of the people in it, so I didn't get to see that difference. I played the ones we aren't allowed to talk about, so I can't have an opinion about it. But I can say that it is on an older. Currently, the beta we just had is on an older version, is my understanding, right? So if what you're saying is true, there's changes already, then you must have been playing a pretty old press release. They changed it, updated to the beta, and that one's still an older version, so you're willing to give some leeway to the fact that that's an older version too. It's already had some changes, and it is, in fact, a beta. I think that's a fair point. And to be honest, I don't think you're the only one that feels that way, because Crip said it was, 5 or 6 out of 10, but his take was that if he believes that they changed the issues he had about beta, it's a 9 or a 10 out of 10. He actually thinks at that point it's pretty good. That kind of sounds very similar to the way you're saying, which you think you're willing to give it, some wiggle room for the fact it's a beta.
If it was any other Blizzard product, I would not have that wiggle room. But this team has been very, very responsive in terms of how they've changed the game and their willingness to just flip a switch and change a lot of things. I'll give you one really easy to observe example,
please,
from the from press preview to now, is just the theming of the skill tree, right? So previously you had the same skill tree, right? It was laid out slightly differently, but it had the same sort of like skill clusters where you would do and the same number of skill points to like go to the next skill cluster, right? Those mechanics are unchanged, but the UI is very changed in the sense that you have these like trenches, right?
Yeah.
And when you put a point in, there's blood that like crawls from one end of the trench to the other. And if you played the beta, there's also a dungeon called the Forgotten
City, or was it
Forgotten City?
There's the Forbidden City or the Forgotten City or something like
Forgotten
that.
City. Forgotten City is what it is. And it has that same theme where it has these like trenches of blood that are just pooled down. And
kind of like from the cinematic
so
almost, where it's like they put the blood and summon Lilith and all that in the beginning. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. So there's the theming of this game seems to be around blood, and it's not just like, oh, well, there's a skill tree and click.
It's also incredibly adult, to be honest. Like, there's the one quest where you go to find her husband. I'm forgetting the name off the bat. You go to find her husband, and he's literally skinned alive and chained up and still alive and, like, screaming about how he's loving the pain and all that, and you have to pull the dagger out and kill him. Like, when I saw that, I was like, holy moly. Like, they are going dark with this. And to be honest, I was surprised. I like it. Don't get me wrong. I like it. This isn't negative feedback. I was just surprised how far they were willing to go, considering it seems like a little bit more of a casual audience target. I'm not saying that there's not going to be a hardcore audience. I'm just saying it seems like it's targeted more at the, entry players to MMOs, et cetera. And for most people, I mean, KFC's got a promo, right? So for me, it seems like they're going pretty wide with their grasp of audience, but then they've doubled down on what is fundamentally like pretty polarized. I mean, some of the gore in here is pretty heavy, And
yeah, that's actually, I think it's a very particular kind of adult theming, right? Yeah. So it is that like bloody, gory, violent kind of game. And adult themes that aren't really present are things like overt sexualization, things Correct. You would see like in The Witcher or something like that. Yeah. So like, even though there are some Witcher vibes in terms of like the monsters and the lore and the world, there also isn't some of the other adult themes present as well. Which, by the way, I want to touch on this real quick. I want to fix the most popular forum thread on the Diablo 4 forums right now is talking about boobs. And
really?
Talking about,
I don't read the Diablo 4 forums, to be fair, so I'm going to take your word.
I mean, are you surprised, right? Like, so, but essentially, it's the same complaint that the community had with Diablo 2 Resurrected, in the sense that the Amazon, like, had sort of like, wasn't like sexual in the sense that the Amazon was in Diablo 2, right? And obviously, like, I think that's actually correct. Like, that character should have like some sort of sex appeal. They're kind of a sex icon. The same thing with the Demon Hunter, right? Like, she wears high heels, right? And
like
that
the
sort of
barbarian's shirtless and ripped, and you can see his abs and stuff too, right? I mean,
exactly.
It's a thematic. Okay, I understand the point.
There's a bit of theming going on here, and I do want to say that nobody, except for me, I pointed it out on some forgotten part of a video, but I've discovered that if you look at the rogue, the female rogue or the male rogue, for the record, on the character creation screen, there is sort of like a leg panty shot thing going on. Yep. So there is some of that sex appeal there. It's just that nobody noticed it, right? And that the male has a bulge, for the record.
Well, yeah,
right?
well, in this doesn't the sorceress literally have a boob window? Like, I thought some of the sorceress gear is literally shaped like a diamond in the wheel, so you can see boob. So I guess I was super confused.
The sorceress also has lots of boob windows going on.
Yeah, there's under boob everywhere. I don't get it, honestly. Isn't there significantly there's a lot of it?
I think the folks on the forum are selectively forgetting about the things that are like in the game, or they just didn't go and look right? Because they're there.
It's there. I stumbled upon it, and I definitely was not looking. You know what I mean? I was just like, oh, well, hello, for a moment in some of these. So
it's frankly it's a minor point, but they managed to pull it off in such a way that, this isn't Lost Ark, right? This isn't like every character looks like a K-pop idol or something like that. It's a honest, gritty, dark world.
I'll just come out and say
it's awesome.
If this game had Genshin Impact like giant boobs everywhere, it's going to make the game worse for me, in my opinion. I'm one of the people, and I know there's people on the other side of the fence. God bless you, but for me, I'm one of the people that the more and more that is obvious as opposed to a side effect. Okay, like if you have a attractive female in the game or whatever, that's a side effect of the armor and all that. She's wearing a shirt. But if the main point of the character is look at these giant pair, I don't really find that appealing from a character design aspect. I mean,
and I think that goes doubly so for a game like this, right?
Yeah, it doesn't fit in the thematics at all.
Yeah. It's supposed to be dark and gritty and violent and bloody. So yeah, anyway, that's one thing I love about this game. And there's a downside to this that I want to get to here in a second.
Okay.
But that's important to get right at launch because you can't fix it later.
True.
Right? If the visuals are off, you're stuck. Like you're not going to retexture everything and revisualize the entire game.
Fair point.
And remake your entire sculpting process and texture process and the whole workflow that you've built over years. You're not going to redo it. So the fact that they've got it right means that some of these other things like dungeons, which we should get to, are I think fixable. But this is not a fixable thing. So it's important that they got this right. So the downside here is a big one. The downside is that the game at lower resolutions and lower frame rates looks really bad. And this is the trade-off you make with gritty realism, right? Is that if you're Zelda, if you're the new Zelda game that everyone's so excited about, then you have nice cell shaded graphics and you look fine at 720p 60 or even 720p 30. You look fine, right? But if you have a gritty, realistic game with a whole bunch of like warping on the screen and magical effects and fire and all sorts of things that just tear the screen in half and all sorts of things like that, then you play at 1080p 60 and the game actually looks quite bad.
Yeah, that's a fair enough point. I'm curious to see how much the performance will improve because they said there is some optimization challenges, I guess, for the beta. So I am curious to see what the final product will look like. What I will say is I don't have an amazing computer, but I have a pretty good one. Okay, like a 3-year-old editing computer, a decent one. So 64 gigs of RAM, 16 core, whatever, and a 2080 Ti, which was definitely at the time pretty poppin'. Now it's slacking a little bit, but it's pretty poppin' then. And I had difficulty running the game at 1080 60 while trying to stream or anything like that. And I know there's some hardware acceleration issues, et cetera, with OBS. But if I'm attempting to do something else other than just use the game at the same time, and by the way, even trying to have the Premiere Pro open and how I typically record this chronological. So I record the clip and I drag it in the other, edit that clip, have that finished, and then I do the next clip. Very typically, that's how I edit. And that is impossible with the current iteration of the game. If I try to launch Adobe, and I know I could switch the encoding from NVIDIA to CPU and all that, but if I try to do standard editing, standard launching, I can even not be live streaming. I can just be trying to record, and it will factually not happen. It will blue screen the computer. And I don't know if there's a memory leak or something that's going on associated with it. I've heard there is. But the optimization was some of the worst I've ever seen in a newer product. So that was my major complaint from the beta. It was fairly insufferable. I understand it's a beta and all that, but I'm just talking about the gameplay, the graphics-wise, loaded terribly.
That said, I run a 2-computer setup, and I ran into none of these issues. And my specs are very similar to yours. I think I have a AMD 5960X or whatever it is, but similar generation kind of specs as you on my computer. But the only thing I was running was Diablo 4. There's literally nothing else running on that computer, and then just like HDMI out to my capture device. So
that would change the performance significantly, I would think.
Yeah, I think for most people though, that's not the case, right? They're usually like alt tabbing out to like a YouTube video or a Maxroll guide or whatever it is, right?
Well, how to put this? The average person, I think, had more disconnects than they did stuttering or graphical issues. I would think was probably fair. I also think my experience is probably, as you're saying, trying to think about my words properly. I think it's more than likely not the average person, because you're correct. I think the majority of people aren't running into both of these, and it's probably some VRAM issue I'm running into with OBS plus the D4, etc. And if you have a two computer system and you're not having those issues with similar specs, then it's more than likely only going to be a creator-related problem. The only thing I'm curious about is whether or not, if your computer is under a significant load, like you're a techie guy, you are very typically able to keep your computer clean and not having all these problems, etc. You know, you have full performance of your PC, I would assume. So I'm kind of curious whether if other people stress tested like I was doing with OBS in a similar way, if they would have had similar experiences, or if you know, or if it's just an OBS related thing. Because I think it was Trigger Happy John that said that there was a hardware acceleration issue that more than likely is affecting a large number of the content creators at the moment. And I know NVIDIA had an update with their graphics, and after I went the update, it did significantly help. So hopefully, I'm assuming by launch, and I didn't, when I was doing my review, I didn't really dictate any of how I felt about it based upon the performance issues. It was mostly the gameplay aspect, because I'm assuming it's on launch, it's okay.
I think that's probably a good assumption. There's a few months left towards launch, and I think so. The way these drivers work is that the game developer works basically directly with, you know, the vendor, right? Especially NVIDIA, and the NVIDIA will pull out a new version of a driver just for this, you know, one game, right? Is if they find a problem, right? Because it's bad for them too, right? Like people buy graphics cards. So someone's going to buy a 4090 because Diablo 4, right?
No, and it
might be me.
Point.
I might be the person buying a 4090 because of Diablo 4. Right?
I mean, like,
you know what I'm saying? Like
someone tabs out to a YouTube video or Maxroll guide or whatever, then all of a sudden their computer crashes. Like, it doesn't make the graphics card company look very good as well. Yeah, that's a good. Yeah, you know, that's a good point. I didn't really think of it.
And in fact, this we were having discussion about this earlier. This game is so huge that. A lot of the sort of like YouTube tech community, they typically put sort of a standard battery of games on their test list to test like how many frames they're getting in particular games. I have a feeling that Diablo 4 might land in some of those batteries of tests alongside things like Elden Ring and Shadow Tomb Raider and other like sort of like standard games that have come to be representative of how well a graphics card performs. So there's a chance that D4 just shows up as just a graphics standard in general. So if they don't get it good, then that would be bad.
Okay, so that's out for the most part. I think we agree that there's some wiggle room to be had for some of the ratings that are going on. For the most part, it was pretty good. I was more optimistic than I was pessimistic. My general advice to the general public was, don't hype it up as the best game ever. You might disappoint or ruin the game for you. However, also don't just believe the hype that it's literally dog shit, because I'm seeing a lot of people go out of the way and just throwing all these complaints down there, which are really either not indicative of the fact it's a beta, not indicative of the fact that it's level 25. Like, I've had my own fair share of clickbait videos of the best legendary ever, the best barbarian build, whatever. But the fact is, we don't really know. And because the game is not fully out yet and there's some wiggle room. However, I think there are maybe...
Well, I mean, we know at Maxroll, but that's sort of in the bag of secrets, and those aren't going to get out for a while.
Everyone's played the in-game beta, where you're able to like actually try out the game in particular. But for the general people, they were able to actually see what's going on level 25. And I'm mostly thinking about comets here, not necessarily, and more of reactors and stuff, to be honest. I'm not necessarily even thinking about the people that have been playing Diablo is forever, as much as it is the general reviewers, the Articos, the IGN of the world. I don't know. I'm not trying to name names or whatever. I'm trying to say that the majority of the reviewing type of people that I have seen have had a fair amount of criticisms. And I'm wondering as to what level you believe those criticisms are fair, or if you have some as well yourself, or where do you think, if we had to find some concerns, where would they be?
Yeah. So the concerns, I think, are in specific. There's one specifically that I'm working on a video for right now. In terms of barbarians itemization, and rogue is a little bit of part of this conversation as well. And then there's sort of a big one in terms of the dungeon objective design. I think that one that's a pretty huge one. And then there's maybe a more minor one in terms of how side quests kind of like feel and track. And then if you want to get really minor, there's like sort of a lack of social systems. Yeah,
the social one, I did know this actually. Now that you mention it, yeah, it was one. Yeah. It's kind of one of those ones that happens as a side effect. You're later like, oh, there's not really like a lot of this in the game, but it doesn't really detract from the game for me. I will say one of the ones you mentioned about the dungeon design. I'm a little bit fence riding on that. I haven't gone so far as to being very upset by it. I've definitely played enough dungeons to see what people are talking about. Okay. Yeah. And I think my take on that, and I'd love to hear yours, is that if Act 1 is there's 23 dungeons, I think, and we were able to do 22 of them within Act 1. If those 23 or whatever, they're decently repetitive, if they're repetitive only within Act 1, like Act 1 has this style of dungeon, that's fine. You get on to Act 2, if they're all the same style as Act 1, like all the way through the game, they all have this, the Mr. Llama, one room, two other rooms type of review that he did, which I thought was hilariously accurate, is if that is all the way through the game, then I would agree with the dungeon complaints. However, if that's an Act 1 problem, you get to Act 2 and maybe all the dungeons are circular or whatever. You get what I'm saying? Where each kind of act has its own style. So that way all 160 or whatever dungeons they said there aren't all basically one of three different types of designs. Then I'm going to think it's totally fine. I'm not really going to have the same problem with it. So I'm wondering if it's a beta Act 1 problem, or if you feel that the dungeon design itself innately does have some core fundamental flaws.
I think it is the dungeon design itself.
Okay.
And it doesn't feel like, frankly, it doesn't even feel like this was the version of dungeons that they kind of wanted to ship with or want to ship with. It kind of feels like a very early version of dungeons. And the reason I say this is there's a lot of different, like, how would you say, a lot of different versions of the same objective, right? So like there's this save the prisoners objective, right? And the save a prisoners objective, you'll see, oh, well, this dungeon you save 5 prisoners, in this dungeon you save 6 prisoners, in this dungeon you save 7 prisoners, in this dungeon you save 8 prisoners. And it almost feels like they made some sort of like prototype of what dungeons were going to be, and then they started trying to figure out what all the objectives would be and kind of what the base design was going to be. And then someone told them to ship the game. That's what it feels like to me. It's like they were getting into it, and then they were like, nope, got to get it out the door. That's what it feels like to me.
If that is the case, is there enough time between the beta and maybe they've already done it, but it wasn't in the beta? Is there enough time to solve this problem before launch?
I don't think so.
Neither do I.
Let me tell you why. We know this from previous Diablo games, and that anytime you design a procedurally generated piece of kit, whether it's sort of the Diablo 3 kind of like puzzle procedural generation, or if it's even the much simpler sort of Diablo 2 like square-based procedural generation. Sure. Either way, you essentially, if you have one dungeon, you have to design that dungeon 100, 1,000 times to make that procedural generation feel random, if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's like sort of like a AI art bot. If you only feed it one input, the randomization based upon that one input isn't going to be very common. Whereas if you give it all these speculations, then you'll have a more unique approach each time you have those inputs. Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't think they per se can fix every single dungeon in the game. However, I have a bit of insight because I read every single little thing in the game. So if you go into the achievements in the beta and you read all the achievements, in the beta achievements, there is a list of dungeons that essentially are the like end game dungeons that you're going to be running over and over again. Okay. And it's a very short list. It's I can't remember how many off the top of my head, but I would say it's 15 or 20.
Sure.
Right. So what if instead of them trying to fix every single dungeon of the game, what if they ship the game and most of the dungeons of the game, the 150 whatever dungeons, they're just not ready, and they work, but like they're kind of boring, and they have all these problems, right?
Sure.
But they focus on these 20 such that when players get to the end game and these 20 are what they're running all the time, they have some of that procedural generation, and they're better. They have more like sandpaper applied to them, and that they have a
sort of separate group that they can focus their attention on. That way, the other one-timers, you get out of your way for your codex of power or whatever, they're out of the way and done, and then you can. Yeah,
you might not be able to do it for 150 dungeons, but you might be able to do it for 10 or maybe even 20. Apply that level of work, and even then that would still be like quite a lot of work to get done before launch, but that would at least be like somewhat achievable.
Do you believe there's and not sorry to change topics on you totally here, because I actually think that's a good point, and for the most part we're just going to go in a circle agreeing about the dungeons. Like they're fairly repetitive, not enough to ruin the game for me. Your point about the separate in-game ones are well taken, and I accept that. So the other part I'm curious about as well is build diversity. The way it felt to me, and I could be wrong, I'll admit. I mean, I only played however many hours it was, and it is the beta. But I will admit that I did get the impression that there were not too many available builds for each class. It felt like there's a decent amount, and I'm sure it will open up as more things become available. But I felt a little bit forced into like, you're a whirlwind barb or you're a storm druid. Like it felt a little bit like I was going down a World of Warcraft class, and I'm either a affliction lock or you're a destruction lock. Like it felt for me like some of them were pre-programmed that no, you're going to do this, you're going to do this. And then some of the legendary items felt a little bit the same way to me. That being said, I'm not opposed to that being the case, because it is fundamentally sort of how these games work. Some of the builds are going to be more obvious than others. Eventually, someone will come out with something they theory crafted for 1,000 hours that works absolutely perfect, and then that person did a great job, right? So I'm not against the concept. I'm just wondering how you... Oops, bumped my mic. I'm just wondering how you felt about build diversity and the variety within each individual class.
Yeah, so I totally understand what you're saying. And I have insight because I went and read all the achievements.
Lovely. And you're the guy that
read all the Codex of Power and all that kind of stuff, right? So I think there's two different worlds, right? As you're leveling, there's the leveling world. And the leveling world is, I have a class fantasy, and I want to fulfill that class fantasy. I want to be a bear. I want to be a werewolf. I want to be a fire sorcerer. I want to be an ice sorcerer. I want to be a whirlwind barb. I want to be a whatever, right? I want to be a corpse explode necro.
Agreed.
Whatever it is. That's the leveling fantasy, and that's what we saw in the beta, right? But then if you go and you start looking at legendary aspects, you'll see things like when you use this ability, actually, it does all of its damage in a shockwave. So there's a shockwave pulverize druid build that's actually quite good, and you could get this legendary. Not very many people did, because very few people, I think, stuck with druid for long enough.
True.
And if you build around that, and you build around fortify and the life mechanics on that and some other things, all of a sudden pulverize is not this like center melee AoE thing. It's a thing that's more of just like a thing that you cast in a line. It changes the gameplay entirely, and now the build is way more dynamic and way different. And that also, what we haven't seen yet, that's not present in the beta in any way, shape, or form, is how even unique items kind of like play into that as well. So I think, and also Paragon boards and all that kind of stuff as well.
True.
So I think the build diversity will come down to a couple of things. So as you level, you'll have this class fantasy, and that will be more of how do you feel about it. And for most classes, I think all of them will be fairly good, right? Like there'll always be a good way to level. There'll obviously be the speedrunner strats,
right.
But even if you're not a speedrunner, you should be able to just pick up some class fantasy and play through the game and be happy with that and sort of get to the end game. Then once you're to the end game, there should be some kind of more advanced version of that build with legendaries and other things that you can start sprinkling in. And then that's where you start seeing certain builds sort of pull away from the pack a little bit, right? Because they have all the right multipliers. And this is, by the way, where we start talking about the barb. Right?
Yeah, I know. We got to talk about Whirlwind and Death Blow and all this. That's what where you're going with this is where my brain is wondering, which is once we get to the end game, how many of these classes are having builds that pull away? And when they pull away, how big is the gap? Because what I do and don't want to see is I would love to see that the Druid has, let's say, in game, 6 different builds, and all of them are decently viable at some level. Obviously, one's always going to be better, right? It's just how it's going to work. So, And then that one that's better, let's say it's a 10% gap. I don't want to see a 300% gap where literally if you do anything else, like people are like, what are you doing on this class? You're trolling. So what I'm hoping is the case is where there's not, 5, 6 different classes and 12 different builds total is what I'm wondering. So do you think it's the scenario where we get to end game and it's going to be like, there's an obvious, like this for every class, there's an obvious one that's just completely busted? Or do you think they're planning to mix that up? Because I know they did say
depends on your goals, right? So if you're trying to blast as hard as possible, there's going to be one best build,
sure,
right? And there's going to be one best class that has the one best build. And if you want to be the best thing, then you have to play the flavor of the month kind of thing.
Sure.
I think that's always the case, regardless of the game, regardless of how well balanced it is. But despite that, I think the way that this game has presented itself with all the different sort of like permutations, I think the meta, at least at first, will be quite dynamic, and it'll take a little while for people to sort of like solve the problem of like what is the best build. So like to your point way earlier, like nobody will really know what the best build is until the game is launched and like a month has gone by, and then everyone will look like back at all of the YouTuber videos and laugh a little bit.
Yeah.
And we'll laugh at ourselves as well. But,
of course.
That's just, nobody knows like how certain mechanics are going to work because the tooltips will ultimately lie to you. Even when you're talking about super high level players. Now, if your goal is a little bit different, right? If your goal is to, get to end game and, to enjoy getting a class to like level 100, and then maybe at that point, you're not seeking like higher challenges, then I think there should be a lot of super viable stuff for you, right? Well, we should talk about multipliers though, because fundamentally this game has a lot of the same itemization as Diablo 3.
Yeah.
In the sense that the goal of the itemization is to stack as many damage multipliers as possible. And to be fair, they've done a much better job of telling you which items are multiplicative or additive if you turn on the advanced tooltips in this game. which is really nice.
Should be
You
on
don't
by
have to-
default, honestly. I feel like, but
Yeah, I kind of agree. And Lucky Hit and all those sorts of like advanced ideas, I think should be on by default. But in any case, the Barbarian has sort of a big problem, and the problem is that they can equip 4 weapons. One of them being a 2-handed weapon, which benefits from legendary powers and secondary effects at double the rate.
that's the problem. Like that.
Now-
That's what's so confusing about it is you give them 4 weapons, but weapons are fundamentally better than other legendaries. Basically,
because they can stack damage multipliers. Now that would be fine if they could equip 4 weapons. If the 4 weapons only applied their power when you used that weapon,
that ability. Yeah,
right?
that's how I thought it worked until we got
That's
into
not how it works. That's not how it works. How it works is you equip 4 items and you benefit from all of the legendary powers. You benefit from all of the secondary effects, right? And you benefit from all of the gem slots as well, right?
Which is honestly a little crazy.
They're all stat sticks. So like in like World of Warcraft, right? Everybody has, even spellcasters have like a wand or something, and usually use this as like a little stat stick or something like that, right? Like you have a bow as like a warrior, whatever it is, right? And unfortunately in Diablo 4, not everybody has this. Now Rogue does. Rogue has a bow and 2 one-handed weapons, but every other class is like, well, use a one-hander and an offhand, or use a two-hander. Right. And Barbarian, for some reason, gets all these extra slots, and they still get a class mechanic on top of it too, which has 2 extra multipliers on it.
But the expertise one, I'm sure you're referring to expertise.
Expertise, yeah, it also has 2 extra multipliers.
Yeah, so that's a little bit of a problem in and of itself. And my other issue is the fact that, like you're saying, stacking multipliers are typically just the way this thing works. So because you're doing stacking multipliers, it's like if you're not, you're just kind of an idiot, and you just got to stack your multiplier damage, and that's how you even get through these other difficulties, which for me really feels like it forces people into a lane of, stack these multipliers because this multiplier has the higher percentage. And if you don't do it, well, then what are you doing? And I'm not saying, I get that's how ARPG works, but it feels a little bit cookie cuttery to me. And then we do run into the problems of Barbarian. And I guess I was hoping for fundamentally something different, because the issue I have with it is that, let's use your example of World of Warcraft with a stat stick. Well, in World of Warcraft, you're not going to get the passive that these different gears have in different slots. Like you can't take the passive from a weapon and put it onto your gloves. You can't take the ones from the legs or whatever. And I understand the aspects are limited to different brackets of them, but they get multiple opportunities, which means...
Actually more limited between press and beta now. They changed some of the categorization to make them even more constrained, which is a good thing, I think.
That's where I'm going with this as well, is I believe that the limitations will make it a little bit less cookie cuttery, because if you just have it where, okay, you put, it's a multiplier, so therefore you have to put it on the weapon. It's like, you're giving me the option to put it on the other ones, but are you really, is the question. So, I feel like the multiplier modifier issue is something that I don't have a solution to it, so I can't just be toxic and be like, hey, there's a problem there. But it seems to me like something where I was just kind of hoping Diablo 4 going into more of the MMO style, this would have been not still a thing like it was sort of in D3, et cetera. But I understand that's the fundamentals of the genre. Like that's just sort of how ARPGs work, and some legendaries will be better than the others, and et cetera. But it still feels like the best defense is an offense. I do like, to be fair, to give credit where credit is due, I do really like one mechanic, which is that the unstoppable mechanic, you can remove, like for instance, the Earthen Bulwark. You can actually remove a CC when you have it. So there is some really smart play around, well, if I use it now, it's a shield for the damage, but if I use it after I've been hit with the CC, it removes the CC and gives me a moment of almost like a human Treekin from WoW, and PvP was very OP for this exact reason. It gives me a get out of jail free card. And there was some really cool defensive mechanics that I actually enjoyed quite a bit with that, to kind of give some yin yang on my feedback.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because I think there's there's actually a bit of innovation that D4 is doing that we should talk about, right?
Let's hear it.
So first is the health orb. Okay, when you play StarCraft 2, your eyes should be bouncing to different parts of the screen, right? Like if you're a very high level player, right? You should be looking at the mini map, and then you should be looking back towards the center of the screen. Then you should be looking at like a group of enemies, and you should be, microing against that. Then you should be going back to your base and looking at macro, and then going back to the mini map and so on. So your eyes should be doing kind of like this, right? So there's a level of skill in the sense that you know what to check and when to check it and how to check it, right? And I think they've done a little bit of that with the health orb in this game. So what happens, and you can even see it in the footage right now, you see like this mana orb that was on your health there.
Yep.
And so instead of giving you this like buff bar that tells you how healthy you are or what shields you have or whatever, they actually modify the UI to tell you if you're vulnerable, if you're fortified, if you're healthy, if you're injured, if you're shielded, all of these sort of like different effects. And I would suspect that they continue to add that. And you have to pay attention to those because the damage multipliers that we talked about earlier a lot of times are contingent upon the fact that you're in a particular state. So they'll say
burst
something
windows or fortify or whatever. I think it was the druid I was playing. I play a couple of 25 druids, and the druid I like the most out of all the classes, by the way. But when I was playing the druid, I forget what it was, but there's something based upon fortify's damage. So I had a modifier with the aspect, and what I was doing is building my fortify, having the damage based upon that with the modifiers, and then it was one of the ways I could actually get my damage to feel like somewhat decent, fairly early on.
That's overpower, and I want to talk about overpower too because I think that's an innovation too. But this specifically, you'll see something like if your character has a mana shield over 80% health, and 80% health is healthy, right? That's how they say that, right? Or they'll say something like if your character is fortified, which means most of your health orb is sort of like filled with that solid red instead of like the sloshy red, right? So if your character is fortified, then you'll also see sort of like this
shield around it.
Describe it. This like sort of shield around the health orb. And then when you have that state, then you actually get the damage multiplier. And if you don't have that state, you don't have the damage multiplier. So a lot of times you might be in a tough fight or something like that, and you want to burst your damage out. You have to sort of bounce your eyes down. Like a top player, right, would have to bounce their eyes down to look for that health state.
Well, and it's much better
verify it and then spend the resource.
Well, it's a much better visual indicator because a lot of the times you have to look at these tiny little debuffs and then be able to read the icon. Like, here's this little debuff. How much is the graph slowly, OPEG'd out? So it's very difficult to tell sometimes. So when I know this, for instance, like the vulnerable state with the mana cracks and all that, and then put two together, oh, that's vulnerable. It made, like you're saying, it made the moments of being like when I'm playing hardcore, like I'm, I'm vulnerable, let me be a little bit more scared or what have you, or I have a barrier now, I can take a hit. It made that way more subconscious and automated, which is nice. I like that because it made it, I didn't feel like I was having to min-max my attention as much, and I didn't feel like I was having to make as many decisions as much. It's like, okay, this one's up, use this one's up. You can see it there. There's another example of it, the little bar of it. So yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I think I actually quite liked it felt like the Diablo had more reason to have defensive abilities than the other ones, at least to me. And I personally really like that because I still play Immortal. And in Immortal, for instance, you get one shot. In PvP, you just get one shot. And obviously, there's the pay to win and all the garbage related to that. But also, there's like a fundamental problem. Even if you don't talk about the pay to win, there's still a fundamental problem in how defensive is just terrible compared to offense. So you just get deleted instantly. And it definitely seems like in this game, there's more defensive options, which I like. I personally like a tough fight. I don't like it when I'm blasting through one-shotting everything, and I prefer the game to be balanced around. I feel like I almost died there. Like, that's just a funner experience for me. I'm not saying it's the way it should be, but for me, I like almost losing, or in fact losing, to some of the battles. That is more enjoyable overall for me. So I was glad to see that in this game.
And those defensive mechanics, I think, are very intentional because there are two more mechanics that I think are very, very powerful that we should talk about that are new. First of all is this idea of fortify. And it wasn't like this in press, but in beta, they seem to have balanced Fortify around Fortify gain on maximum health. So, previous it was like, hey, you get some like sort of like set amount of Fortify, and certain mechanics that had like percentage gain Fortify were like way too strong, and certain mechanics that just had like a raw number of Fortify was like not very good, right? So I think they've balanced it around now on maximum life, and that leads you to sort of two conclusions. One, if you have higher maximum life, then you can get more Fortify, which can shield you more. So your health is actually, you're like double dipping on defensiveness
Snowball.
when you increase your health, right? So that's really cool. The other really cool part about it is overpower. So overpower is a new type of critical hit. So like, and why this is important in Diablo 3 metas forever, every meta has always been about, first you stack as much crit hit chance and then crit hit damage, and then you stack damage multipliers, right? So that's the damage meta for Diablo 3 for forever, for and ever and ever. But in this game, you actually have a choice. You can kind of go for that standard sort of crit meta if you'd like, but you can also go for overpower. And what overpower does is it crits and it adds your Fortify and your life to the damage. So in a way, you like have a way to do damage that's also a defensive modifier at the same time. So you
sounds
double
strong
dip.
in PvP.
Yeah. So you double dip on defensiveness and offensiveness at the same time, and it pushes your character in sort of a different direction. And I think it ultimately leads to better build diversity, because the best builds won't necessarily always be crit. They might be overpower in Fortify mechanics instead.
No, I think that's a good point. And I mean, as I was complaining about a little bit earlier, build diversity for me, it seems important for the average person. I think people are going to want to have a character I think more people are going to want to have one class that they play like 80% of the time than people are going to play all of the classes like evenly, if that makes sense. And so for that reason, having build diversity for the average user is going to be quite important. And I think the defensive is what you're mentioning with the overpower, a nice way to kind of break that up a little bit, because that is fairly unique. I can't think of any Diablo, and granted, I didn't play that much of Diablo 2, so I can't say for certain, but I can't really think of any other Diablo mechanics that really stack based upon how tanky you are.
PoE does this a little bit, but my problem with PoE is that these mechanics are usually like hidden in some like end game craft or like some difficult to find thing. And the way that the build actually ends up coming together because of this mechanic is like somewhat hidden, and you have to go on like POB and kind of like put it all together. And this like even after you put it together, you don't really understand how it works until you play it for a little while. So that's sort of my criticism there. But they do have those mechanics. They're just sort of like baked into like the later game and sort of like into other places in the game. Whereas I think Diablo 4 does a lot better job sort of like putting it right into the face of the player. Like you start getting Fortify, I want to say like level 13, you start getting Fortify in a lot of classes. There are classes, by the way, the class design does a good job of having different mechanics available for different classes. We should talk about this, right?
We should. I also want to talk about PvP, and we're getting a little bit long on the video, so I don't want to take too long much of your time, but I also want to talk briefly about PvP as well. So let's touch on both these topics before we end here. You want to start? Let's start with the mechanic you want to talk about first. Let's talk about different mechanics.
So every class sort of like has a bit of a specialty and like certain mechanics. Like for example, you'll see Rogue, they have vulnerable and crit. They have vulnerable and crit all over the place. And vulnerable will proc something else, and something else will proc vulnerable. Sure. Or something else will proc crit, and crit will proc something else. But if you go to sorcerer, they'll proc lucky hit, for example, or they'll proc like mana or whatever.
Or overpower for the druid seems to be fairly large.
And then druid has overpower and fortify, and these sorts of mechanics, as well as poison, right? And then like necromancer has these like health orbs that you can pick up. They have the corpses.
Sure.
And they also have some vulnerable mechanics as well. So like there's a little bit of crossover here and there, but it seems like the classes actually do have like we're mostly good at this mechanic, and then if you want to get this other mechanic, you're going to have to get that through some other means, and you're going to have to dip into like legendary powers to maybe get a shield or something.
I did enjoy how they fit the thematics of each class to each individual mechanic that's shared between classes, but some have more of a specialized. For me, Druid's the one I play the most. So that's the one I'm going to fall back on for examples. And the fortify type of mechanic going with Druid, or even HP for Barbarian with Thorns, for instance, they have built in the skill tree there. I liked how there was an obvious correlation between each one of the classes, so it did sort of fill the theme, and which means if I want to play a certain style, I feel like if I want to play a tanky character, I'm going to pick the Druid. Like I feel like the Druid fits that style more, and I actually really, which is why I like the Druid. I liked playing tank in WoW. I played Pharaoh Bear, or Bear tank in WoW, and I also played Frost Mage, were the two I played the most, and I played Kitty Cleave and PvP and all that, but I really liked just being able to stack the biggest amount of health. I thought it was cool because the Bear has literally the largest amount of health anyone's going to have in the game. Like just flat number, you have the biggest. And I really like that it seems like some classes are specifically going to be that way. Because in WoW, it was a big deal for me that it was like, this is my identifier. I'm the only class that has 100,000 plus health. Here it is. And so I enjoyed that quite a big deal. So I agree with you about that point. But I am curious, because I didn't get access to it all in any of the betas we can't talk about, or about the ones that we can. I didn't get my hands on PvP at all. So I'm curious if you did. And we can't really talk about, I guess, your experience with it. But I'm curious as to whether or not PvP matters to you at all in a game like this.
I think it would if they're able to pull it off, right? I think the problem with PvP in Diablo 2 and in Diablo 3 is that it's a one-shot fest, right? So it's fine. It's fine if you like go in with like some rules in place and you say, hey, like you can't do this and you can't do that, and this isn't allowed and this isn't allowed, and then you can have sort of like a fun PvP time. But if you just show up with like whatever the best PvP build is, you're just gonna delete each other,
or like
regardless of the game,
Or there's fundamentally some broken mechanics, which I'm sure we'll make it on launch. But the whole like Necromancer 95% immune time thing, like how do you beat that in PvP? You know what I mean? Other than CC and lock somebody down during the 3 frames they're available, et cetera. So like that could be a problem. I also see like stuff like Druid. Let's say defense is really good. I just don't see how you can balance PvE and PvP without fundamentally different rule set is kind of where I'm coming at it. It's like even a percentage of it is going to break it. Like in Immortal, it's 66% reduced, but even at that much of a reduction, still doesn't matter because the mechanics are still broken on some level, right? And it's more so with D3 and D2 because you don't have the combat rating system and all these other reductions, et cetera. It's a totally different game. So with those games, it is totally one shot. I thought Lost Ark did it the way I would like to see it in D4, which I know is not the way it's going to function, but Lost Ark did it what I thought was appropriately. You make a PvP character that's everything unlocked, and you can just select and build whatever you want. You have that character, it's done, and it's into a queue system that has a leaderboard totally separate. You can just only play PvP if you want. You don't have to worry about, I grinded for 5,000 hours, so I have the absolute best item in the entire world right now, therefore I win in PvP. It's just, hey, make a class, make any class you want, any skills, everything's unlocked and available, has its own rule set, go, and you can legitimately see who's the best instead of the other issues that we might arise into.
I actually totally agree. Lost Ark, I do talk with the Maxwell Lost Ark team from time to time. Lost Ark's PvP is actually fantastic.
Yeah.
And it's frankly a whole different game. The people that are very, very good at PvP are maybe not like the best raid pushers and so on, right? They're maybe not the best theory crafters for different builds and all those sorts of things. But man, they're fantastic at their Bard PvP, right? Yeah. And I think if we ultimately saw something like that in D3, that would be the way to go. Again, like we don't know what they really have planned. Maybe they have something like that planned eventually for us. But I mean, if we do see something that's like similar to like D2 or D3, I think you're right in the sense that it has a natural gravity towards not being a great experience, even if they try to balance it somewhat. It's not going to be like a fantastic experience because the game's naturally going to be balanced around PVM content. Yeah. And for the record, if they try to try to fix it by pouncing around PvP content. That's a mistake.
It will ruin
That's
PvE.
a bigger mistake.
Yeah, I completely
you can't
agree.
do that.
Most people are going to want to play this game for PvE, and that's why I'm saying it should be separate queue, separate balance, because I've played, I come from a lot of games, but realistically, almost every MMO I've ever played has to have fundamentally some changes for PvP that are unique only to PvP. And this is, I mean, in basically any game, any MMO. I mean, all the way back to RuneScape 2001, like they realized this. So I really hope it's the same type of situation where, because I actually am someone that enjoys both sides of the game. I'm heavily more of the PvE side, like probably the more average user when it comes to like PvE Diablo shit. But the PvP is something I would dip my toes in because I played, tens of thousands of hours of League of Legends. I did coaching for that back in the day, and there's some games that I enjoy the PvP aspect. I played the Lost Ark PvP. I actually enjoyed it a great deal. I thought they did it fairly well, and even though I no longer play that game, I definitely would experience some of the PvP and would enjoy it. I think there's a good subsection of people that would actually play the game if the PvP is good and would not otherwise. So I do hope it's not an afterthought. I do hope they have their only queue, but I do not. More importantly, your point is well taken, that it is more important they don't sack the rest of the game in order to make PvP work. And I don't think they're going to. I seriously doubt that. So
I think where it gets challenging, and you'll see this again to make the comparison to Lost Ark, you'll see that all of a sudden a lot of different things matter for PvP that don't matter for PvM at all. So for example, currently the game supports up to 3:1 widescreen, right? And if I play 3:1 widescreen, there's currently sort of an advantage for folks who are using Leap or Teleport because they can teleport
or place the Hydras even farther away,
or place Hydras or whatever, right?
Agreed.
But for PvM, that's an optimization, and it really only affects you, so to speak, and or like maybe the very top players / streamers who are trying to like race to be number one or whatever it is, right? Sure. But overall, like for the vast majority of the player base, it does not have really any impact whatsoever. You go to PvP though, and then all of a sudden having an ultra wide is everything. And
we run into the same problem in Immortal,
people.
Where Immortal is a fairly heavily PvP game, and they're still adding more PvP to this day. And in the game, a phone is significantly better than an iPad because of the screen resolution issue. You literally see less of the game on an iPad than you see, and there's a disadvantage to that as well. So. Your points are well taken. I think we kind of sounds like we kind of feel the same about PvP. And honestly, I think that's the most sane, normal take. I don't really see anyone disagreeing with almost anyone else when it comes to PvP. It sounds like most Diablo players, and to be honest, even most users are kind of on the same page about this one. No one's really looking at D4 like this is the PvP game of the year. So,
of course, yeah.
But with that being said, I'm going to say 7 out of 10, my impression of how the beta was. I think if they fix all the things that I'm complaining about from the beta, and I'm not even so much concerned about them fixing the things because I think the game is still going to be fun, and I play games for what they are, not what I wish they were for the most part. I've learned my lesson on that one. So I would upgrade that rank a point or two. I'm glad that you're more optimistic about it because I see a lot of the people ruining the game, like kind of already, just by saying, because the dungeons aren't good, the game's dog shit or whatever. And it's just a little bit, it feels a little bit bad to try to have a normal, nuanced conversation these days. But,
exactly. Yeah. My ranking overall to your 7 out of 10 would be a 8 out of 10, cautiously optimistic. That would be mine.
Yeah, so it sounds like we're kind of in the same brain about that. But I really appreciate your time, your information, and breaking down your opinion. I enjoyed the conversation. So if you guys haven't seen Echo yet, it'll be in the pinned comment. There will be a link to the channel. Go watch the man. Obviously, you're making D4 content. Do you have anything you want to plug?
Yeah, obviously I'm making D4 content over at youtube.com/Echohack. Check me out there. And of course, if you haven't subscribed to this handsome gentleman, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Because he's
you're on Twitter
also
as well.
worthy of your praise.
You're also on Twitter as well, from what I understand, too. So follow Echo on Twitter. I saw you have a lot of really good Twitter shares about D4. Like you'll post a screenshot and then, it has a little breakdown or whatever. So I actually been looking at those as well. So hit them up on Twitter. But thanks for your time. And until next time we do one of these, bye-bye, everybody.